If you think prison is just about doing your time and getting out, you've never heard of Pelican Bay. Smash that like button if you're ready for a story that'll haunt you long after this video ends, drop a comment if you dare, and subscribe because what comes next will leave you speechless. The concrete walls are 8 inches thick. The cell measures 11 feet by 7 feet. There's no window, no clock, no way to tell if it's day or night except for the fluorescent light that never turns off completely. The man inside has been here for 23 hours today. He was here for 23 hours yesterday. He'll be here for 23 hours tomorrow. He's been here for 9,437 days straight. That's 26 years without touching another human being. His name is Marcus Chen, and he's losing his mind in America's most notorious Supermax prison. But unlike other inmates at Pelican Bay State Prison, Marcus wasn't sent to the security housing unit for murder. He wasn't sent there for assault. He was sent there for a drawing. It started in 1998 when Marcus, then 24 years old, was serving a 5-year sentence for drug possession at Courtroom State Prison. He was a low-level offender with no violent history, a community college dropout who'd made bad choices but wasn't considered dangerous. Then one day during a routine cell search, correctional officers found a sketch he'd made in his notebook. The drawing showed a phoenix rising from flames with Chinese characters underneath. Marcus said it was just art, something to pass the time, a symbol of rebirth he'd copied from a book in the prison library. But the gang validation unit saw something different. They claimed the phoenix was a symbol of the Asian boys gang and the characters were coded messages to other members. Marcus had never been in a gang. He had no gang tattoos, no documented gang associations, no history of gang activity. But that single drawing was enough. Within 48 hours, he was classified as a gang affiliate and transferred to Pelican Bay's security housing unit. The classification came with no trial, no appeal process, and no end date. Just 23 hours a day in a concrete tomb. Dr. Sarah Morrison first encountered Marcus in 2015 when she was conducting psychiatric evaluations for a lawsuit against the California Department of Corrections. She'd interviewed dozens of Pelican Bay inmates, but Marcus's case stopped her cold. By then, he'd been in solitary for 17 years, and the damage was catastrophic. He couldn't maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds, Morrison later testified. He had developed severe social anxiety, auditory hallucinations, and what we call hyperresponsivity to external stimuli. When I accidentally dropped my pen, he had a panic attack that lasted 20 minutes. But what disturbed Morrison most was Marcus's confession about the voices. He heard his mother talking to him through the walls, even though his mother had died in 2003. He heard children laughing in the corridor outside his cell, even though no children were allowed in the SHU. He heard his own voice having conversations with him, arguing about whether he was real or whether he'd already died and this was hell. The psychiatric report Morrison filed described Marcus as having severe and possibly irreversible psychological damage consistent with prolonged torture. She recommended immediate removal from solitary confinement and intensive psychiatric care. Her recommendation was denied. The California Department of Corrections maintained that Marcus remained a validated gang member and a threat to institutional security. The evidence? That same drawing from 1998, plus 2 additional pieces of evidence collected over the years. In 2004, another inmate had written Marcus's name on a piece of paper found during a cell search. In 2011, a confidential informant claimed Marcus had been seen making hand gestures during his 1 hour of yard time. These 3 pieces of evidence, spanning 13 years, were enough to keep him buried alive. By 2018, Marcus had been in the SHU for 20 years. He'd watched men hang themselves with bedsheets. He'd heard inmates scream until their voices gave out. He'd seen correctional officers walk past cells where men were bleeding from self-inflicted wounds because it was easier than dealing with them. He'd felt his own mind fragmenting, piece by piece, day by day, until he wasn't sure who Marcus Chen even was anymore. Then one morning, a new psychiatrist arrived at Pelican Bay with a folder full of documents. But when they opened that folder and read what was inside, everything about Marcus's case changed. The psychiatrist's name was Dr. James Reeves, and he wasn't supposed to be at Pelican Bay at all. He was a forensic psychologist from Boston who specialized in wrongful convictions, and he'd stumbled onto Marcus Chen's case by accident while researching a completely different inmate. What he found in that folder would expose a system so corrupt, so deliberately cruel, that even hardened correctional officers would eventually break their silence. Dr. Reeves had obtained Marcus's complete institutional file through a Freedom of Information Act request, and buried in 600 pages of documentation, he found something that should never have been there. The confidential informant who'd reported Marcus making gang hand gestures in 2011 was an inmate named Robert Vasquez. But according to Vasquez's own prison records, he'd been transferred to a facility in Northern California 3 months before the alleged incident occurred. The informant hadn't even been at Pelican Bay when he claimed to witness Marcus's gang activity. If you're starting to realize how deep this nightmare goes, hit that subscribe button right now because what Dr. Reeves uncovered next will make your blood run cold. And drop a comment telling me if you think Marcus ever had a chance at justice, because this system was rigged from the start. Dr. Reeves dug deeper. The 2004 evidence, where another inmate had written Marcus's name on a piece of paper, turned out to be even more disturbing. The paper was actually a list of inmates requesting law library access. Marcus's name was on it because he'd been trying to file appeals. But the gang validation unit had classified it as a gang roster and used it to justify keeping him in solitary for another decade. As for the original drawing from 1998, Dr. Reeves consulted with 3 separate gang experts and 2 Chinese language professors. All 5 confirmed that the phoenix design was a common symbol found in dozens of non-gang contexts, and the Chinese characters simply meant new beginning. There was nothing gang-related about it whatsoever. Marcus Chen had spent 2 decades in psychological torture based on fabricated evidence and misinterpreted art. But Dr. Reeves's investigation revealed something even more sinister. He discovered that between 1995 and 2015, Pelican Bay had validated over 4,000 inmates as gang members based on similarly flimsy evidence. The system was incentivized to keep the SHU full. Correctional officers received overtime pay for working the Supermax unit. Private vendors made millions supplying the specialized security equipment. State funding was allocated based on the number of high-risk inmates in custody. Pelican Bay had become a machine that fed on human beings, and Marcus was just one of thousands being slowly destroyed inside it. When Dr. Reeves first met Marcus in person in June 2018, he barely recognized him as the young man from the intake photos. Marcus was now 50 years old but looked 70. His hair had gone completely white. His hands trembled constantly. He spoke in a whisper, and every few minutes, he'd stop mid-sentence and stare at the wall as if listening to something only he could hear. "Do you know what day it is?" Dr. Reeves asked him. Marcus thought for a long moment. "Tuesday?" "It's Saturday, Marcus." "Saturday," Marcus repeated, like he was learning a foreign word. "I used to know the days. I kept track on the wall, but they painted over my marks. Now everything is just the same." Dr. Reeves asked him about the voices, and Marcus's response was chilling. "They're not as bad as the silence," he said. "The voices at least keep me company. The silence is when I forget I'm real." Armed with his findings, Dr. Reeves contacted the California Innocence Project and the ACLU. By August 2018, Marcus's case had become the centerpiece of a federal lawsuit against the California Department of Corrections. News outlets picked up the story. Human rights organizations called it state-sanctioned torture. Public pressure mounted. But the Department of Corrections fought back hard. They released a statement claiming Marcus was a validated associate of a known prison gang, and that his removal from the SHU would pose a significant security threat. They provided no new evidence, just repeated the same 3 discredited pieces from his file. Meanwhile, Marcus's mental state continued to deteriorate. In September 2018, he experienced a complete psychotic break. Correctional officers found him crouched in the corner of his cell, naked and covered in his own feces, screaming that spiders were crawling under his skin. He was placed in psychiatric observation for 72 hours, given sedatives, then returned to the same cell that had destroyed his mind in the first place. Dr. Reeves filed an emergency motion with the federal court, arguing that keeping Marcus in the SHU constituted cruel and unusual punishment. The hearing was scheduled for November 2018. If the judge ruled in Marcus's favor, he'd be released into the general prison population for the first time in 20 years. If the judge ruled against him, Marcus would likely die in that concrete cell. The night before the hearing, Dr. Reeves received an anonymous phone call. The voice was male, older, with a thick California accent. He identified himself as a retired correctional officer who'd worked at Pelican Bay for 15 years. "You need to know something about Marcus Chen," the man said. "Something that's not in any file." Dr. Reeves grabbed a pen. "I'm listening." In 2006, there was an incident. A correctional officer named Davidson was running a smuggling operation, bringing in drugs and cell phones for inmates who could pay. Marcus found out about it somehow. Davidson was scared Marcus would snitch, so he made sure Marcus could never leave the SHU. He falsified reports, paid off informants, whatever it took to keep that kid buried. "Where's Davidson now?" Dr. Reeves asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's the thing, Document Davidson's now the assistant warden at Pelican Bay. He's the one who's been blocking Marcus's release all these years." The line went dead. When Dr. Reeves walked into that federal courthouse the next morning, he had a decision to make. He could present the evidence he'd already gathered and hope it was enough. Or he could make an explosive accusation against a high-ranking prison official based on an anonymous phone call with no proof. But as he sat down at the plaintiff's table and looked at Marcus, barely holding himself together in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, Dr. Reeves knew he had to take the risk. The judge entered the courtroom. And what happened next would either free Marcus Chen or bury him forever. Dr. Reeves stood before Judge Patricia Whitmore and made a choice that would define his entire career. He presented every piece of evidence proving Marcus's validation was fraudulent. He showed the timeline proving the informant wasn't even at the prison. He displayed expert testimony debunking the gang allegations. And then, with his voice steady and his eyes locked on the judge, he dropped the bomb about Assistant Warden Davidson. The courtroom erupted. Davidson's attorney jumped to his feet, demanding sanctions. The Department of Corrections lawyer called it a desperate smear campaign. But Judge Whitmore silenced them all with a single strike of her gavel. "I want Assistant Warden Davidson in this courtroom tomorrow morning," she said. "And I want every document related to Marcus Chen's gang validation delivered to my chambers by end of business today." If you think this story is intense now, wait until you hear what they found in those documents. Smash that subscribe button because cases like this don't just disappear, and my next video will show you 3 more inmates who are still trapped in the same nightmare. You won't believe what's still happening right now. That night, Dr. Reeves received another anonymous call. Same voice. Same retired correctional officer. "You kicked the hornet's nest, Document Davidson scrambling. Word inside is he's trying to get files shredded before tomorrow." "Can you stop him?" Dr. Reeves asked. "Already did. I made copies years ago. Insurance policy. Check your hotel lobby in 20 minutes. 19 minutes later, a manila envelope was waiting at the front desk. Inside were photocopies of internal memos, incident reports, and handwritten notes spanning 12 years. The evidence was devastating. Davidson had indeed run a smuggling operation from 2004 to 2008. Marcus had witnessed a drug exchange during a medical transport in 2006 and told another inmate he was thinking about reporting it. 2 weeks later, the confidential informant report about Marcus making gang hand gestures was filed. The informant? An inmate who owed Davidson a favor and wasn't even at Pelican Bay at the time. Davidson had forged the entire report. But the documents revealed something even worse. Marcus wasn't Davidson's only victim. Between 2006 and 2015, Davidson had used false gang validations to silence at least 7 other inmates who discovered his smuggling operation or witnessed guard brutality. All 7 were still in the SHU, their minds deteriorating year after year, their lives destroyed to protect a corrupt officer's career. When court reconvened the next morning, Assistant Warden Davidson sat in the witness chair looking composed and confident. He denied everything. The anonymous accusations were lies, he testified. He'd never falsified reports. He'd never run a smuggling operation. He'd simply done his job validating dangerous gang members according to department protocol. Then Dr. Reeves's attorney entered the copied documents into evidence. The color drained from Davidson's face. His attorney requested an immediate recess. The Department of Corrections lawyer suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. And Judge Whitmore's expression shifted from judicial neutrality to barely contained fury. "Mr. Davidson," she said quietly, "I'm going to ask you one more time under oath. Did you falsify gang validation reports to keep inmates in solitary confinement?" Davidson's hands were shaking. His attorney whispered something urgent in his ear. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination," Davidson finally said. The courtroom exploded again. Judge Whitmore called for order, but the damage was done. By invoking the Fifth, Davidson had essentially admitted guilt without saying the words. Within hours, the FBI opened a criminal investigation into corruption at Pelican Bay. The California Attorney General announced a comprehensive review of all gang validations across the state prison system. And Marcus Chen was finally released from the security housing unit after 20 years, 2 months, and 17 days in solitary confinement. But here's where the story takes a turn that'll leave you speechless. Drop a comment right now telling me if you think Marcus can ever recover from what they did to him, and hit that like button if you believe justice was actually served here. Because what happened next proves the system is more broken than you could possibly imagine. Marcus walked out of the SHU on November 28, 2018, into the general population yard at Pelican Bay. It was the first time he'd been around other human beings in 2 decades. The sunlight was so bright it hurt his eyes. The noise of other inmates talking was overwhelming. When someone accidentally bumped into him, he had a panic attack so severe he collapsed. He spent 3 weeks in the prison hospital recovering from the psychological shock of human contact. Dr. Reeves continued working with Marcus, trying to help him relearn basic social skills. How to have a conversation. How to make eye contact. How to exist in a room with other people without feeling like the walls were closing in. The progress was agonizingly slow. 20 years of torture couldn't be undone in a few therapy sessions. In January 2019, the FBI's investigation concluded. Assistant Warden Davidson was arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Ironically, he was sent to a facility with a Supermax unit. The inmates there knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. The 7 other inmates Davidson had falsely validated were released from the SHU. 3 were transferred to psychiatric facilities because their minds were too damaged to function in general population. 1 was released on parole but ended up homeless, unable to hold a job or maintain relationships after decades of isolation. Another committed suicide 6 months after leaving solitary, leaving behind a note that simply said, "I can't turn off the voices." Marcus Chen was released on parole in March 2021, after serving his original 5-year sentence plus 16 additional years because of the false gang validation. He moved into a halfway house in Sacramento, but adjusting to the outside world proved nearly impossible. He couldn't sleep without a light on because the darkness reminded him of his cell. He couldn't be in crowded spaces because the noise triggered panic attacks. He couldn't hold down a job because he'd lost the ability to focus or follow complex instructions. The psychological damage from Pelican Bay's SHU was permanent and irreversible. Dr. Reeves helped Marcus file a civil lawsuit against the California Department of Corrections. In October 2023, the state settled for $4.2 million rather than go to trial. The money couldn't give Marcus back the 20 years they'd stolen from him, couldn't restore his destroyed mind, couldn't bring back the mother who died while he was buried alive in concrete. But it was something. Here's the final twist that should make you question everything about our prison system, and if you're not subscribed yet, click that button right now because I'm exposing more cases like this that the mainstream media won't touch. Share this video with everyone you know, because what I'm about to tell you is still happening today. As of December 2025, Pelican Bay's security housing unit is still operational. Despite the lawsuit, despite the settlement, Despite the proven torture that occurred there, California still keeps inmates in 23-hour lockdown in windowless cells. The reforms that were promised? Mostly cosmetic. The system that destroyed Marcus Chen and thousands of others? Still running. And here's what haunts Dr. Reeves every single day. During his investigation, he discovered that at least 40 inmates currently in the SHU were validated based on evidence just as flimsy as Marcus's. 40 more human beings slowly losing their minds in concrete tombs, some for 20 or 30 years, based on drawings or rumors or fabricated reports. Marcus Chen was one of the lucky ones. He got out. He got justice. He got a settlement. But thousands more are still in there, screaming into the void where no one can hear them. Marcus now lives in a small apartment in Sacramento. He attends therapy 3 times a week. He takes medication for anxiety, depression, and PTSD. He volunteers with prison reform organizations, telling his story to anyone who'll listen. He's dating someone, slowly learning how to trust again, how to let another human being into his life after 2 decades of forced isolation. On good days, he can almost forget the sound of his own voice echoing off concrete walls. On bad days, he still hears the voices telling him he never left that cell at all. The last time Dr. Reeves visited Marcus, he asked him a question that had been weighing on his mind for years. After everything they did to you, after all you've lost, how do you keep going? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Sacramento skyline, at a world he'd almost forgotten existed. Because 40 people are still in there, he finally said. And somebody has to remember they're human. If this story shook you to your core, if you can't stop thinking about Marcus and the thousands like him still trapped in America's Supermax prisons, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell because next week I'm exposing another case that'll make Pelican Bay look tame. And comment below with the word justice if you believe this system needs to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. Because Marcus Chen's nightmare is over. But for too many others, it's still just beginning.